Academic research faces mounting challenges from increasing retraction rates to growing concerns over research integrity. And yet, at the same time, AI is opening new possibilities to make research smarter, fairer, and more resilient. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Krishna Kumar Venkitachalam. I'm also known as Dr. KK. I'm the Innovation Officer at Inago and your host for this very special episode of Inago's interactive podcast series, Research and Beyond, which spotlights the latest advances shaping the STM industry. This episode, titled Peer Review in the Age of AI, Trust, Ethics, and Transformation, marks the start of Peer Review Week 2025 for us. And the theme of the Peer Review Week is Rethinking Peer Review in the AI Era. And I'm truly extremely honored to have Dave Flanagan, the VP of Sales at Wiley, a leader in AI based solutions in the STM industry, for a very timely conversation on how generative AI technology is driving positive change in peer review. So, hello, Dave, and welcome to Research and Beyond.
Hey, nice to meet you, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Looking forward to talking about AI and peer review and everything in between.
You're very welcome. So, Dave, I've done some background research. We've been chatting, and I'm aware that you've done many hats in your professional career. But for the benefit of our audience to know, to let them know you better, may I request you to introduce yourself and describe the work that you've done so far?
Yeah, sure. So I've been with Wiley for more than 20 years. I started off in peer review, so I was an editor. I came out of grad school after I studied polymer science. Came out of grad school, and for 7 or 8 years was reading papers, accepting, rejecting papers, going out to conferences, talking to people. And it's a great job because you get to see everything cool that's coming out. Um, then after that, I got into product management.
Mhm.
So looked at things like cheminformatics and developing new databases. About 7 years ago, people were talking about data science, and that was the new thing. So I got into data science. I learned how to program in Python. Um, and then for the last couple of years, basically the only thing that people have asked me about has either been research integrity or generative AI. So
Yes.
I've been really focusing on those two topics, especially generative AI now for the last couple of years. Um, yeah.
Well, that's a sort of wide, sort of ranging things that you've done. So, from with your experience, with a sort of a wide ranging experience, from all the things that you've described, what do you think is the? I mean, how is technology reshaping scholarly publishing as things stand right now?
Yeah, everything is going faster and at a bigger scale than it was 20 years ago. When I started, we weren't getting papers in the mail anymore. We had, websites and email stuff. I'm not that old, but you would get a couple of thousand submissions a year. You'd be sending out papers to maybe 5 reviewers and getting reports back on 3. You had decent turnaround times. And now the just the sheer amount of quality research that's being done around the world means that journals are getting 5, 10 times as many papers as they used to. Reviewers are overloaded. I heard about somebody sending out referee requests to 20 reviewers and hoping to get 2 back, which I think is crazy. Um, so just the size and the scale, and that makes it sound like it might be a bad thing, but I don't think it is. It's just so much good research going on. And the question is, how do we make sure that good research is, accurate? Is it
Mm,
true? Is it interesting? And how do we support our authors and readers and editors
mm.
as we deal with all this new information that's being generated?
Interesting. So, your perspective is that the increasing submission volumes is primarily the reason for the peer review crisis. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a little more than just the submissions. It's also, in addition to the number of submissions, it is the way those submissions are distributed.
Hmm.
So, for example, we've seen a major increase in the number of submissions from China as China becomes, yes, one of the leaders in, topics dear to my heart, like material science and chemistry. Um, But we're not balancing that out with, for example, asking Chinese researchers to review papers. And I don't think that's because they don't want to. It's because it's harder to match, you know, papers with people when you're coming from, for example, a primarily Western, you
Hmm.
know, journal environment. And so, one of the benefits of AI in that process is being able to do a better job matching papers to the best people to review those papers, whether or not you ran into them at a conference or whether or not you know them,
Right.
because it's so many people that you can't possibly know.
Very cool. So, you considering the theme of the podcast and considering that we are talking already about AI, so in your 20 years or so of in the SCM publishing industry, you probably have seen technology being disruptive in various different ways. And
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot. So, in terms of the disruption that generative AI is creating or
Yeah.
making in this context of STM publishing, but let's narrow that down to peer review. So, what do you think? How does it fit in terms of generative AI and peer review?
Right. Let me zoom back for a second and say
Mhm.
that at least it's my personal belief that generative AI has the potential to be as disruptive as the web browser was 30 years ago or the mobile phone was,
Mhm.
20 years ago. I think we're at a real inflection point, and a lot of it's still potential, but it's every week it becomes easier and easier to see, how that can be disruptive. I think there are big opportunities for ways that we can use generative AI to do the sorts of things that either editors and reviewers don't have the time to do today or can free them up to do other things. So
Mhm.
let me give an example. When a um, when you submit a paper to a chemistry journal, frequently you'll have 30 pages of supporting information with all kinds of, spectra details in it, like all the peaks from all of your carbon and your proton NMR that, you submit with it to prove that the molecules you
Mhm.
made are actually the molecules you made. Um, I would argue that most reviewers probably don't take more than a cursory look at that.
Mhm.
And so Ethan Malik, he's a big thinker in AI and generative AI. He has the principle of the best available human.
Mhm.
And that principle is that generative AI is good at things where you um, you can substitute for the best person that's available to you. So
Mhm.
in cases like that, the best person available for checking 30 pages of supporting information is probably nobody today.
Mhm.
So can we use the computer to go through, check all that supporting information that nobody would really have the time or the inclination to do today, make sure that's correct, and therefore, when it gets published, we're really enriching the scientific literature with more
Mhm.
potentially correct data. So, things like that. What are the things that we can do where we keep people in the loop,
Mhm.
but we can enhance the quality and the reliability of what we're publishing?
Excellent. So, to summarize, an assistive role for, I think you mentioned reviewers right now, but you can probably expand that to the editors as well in terms of doing what they do, and maybe some amount of, let's say, manual, repetitive tasks.
Mhm.
Taking that off the plate so that they can focus on, let's say, what is important in the context of peer review. Excellent.
Yeah.
So, one question you already mentioned, the potential of AI to find the right reviewer for the manuscript that is being submitted. So is that something? Do you find generative AI being of use in that with under that scope as well?
Right. In that case, and I'm using AI as a marketing term
Right.
here, and I'm sure, some of the coders on listening to this would, get what I'm saying when I say that. Um, for matching reviewers to papers, that's more of a general AI or machine learning
Mhm.
problem. You want
Right.
to know, are there people that have some kind of overlap with the paper that you're looking at based on their publication history or their research interests,
Right.
but also other things like how are they connected to the journal? Do they know the journal? Do they know the editor? Are they cited in the paper?
Mhm.
So it really becomes more of a knowledge graph kind of question.
Right.
How many touch points does a potential person have with this paper based on scope and author and citations and publication history and all of that? And that's today. And I think tomorrow, I think there is a generative AI component to that because
Mhm.
what I would love would be, let me give you a story. So when I was an editor,
Hmm.
um, you know, a couple of times a year, you'd have a paper. You would have, one author, one reviewer said it was the best thing ever. One reviewer said it's terrible. And you couldn't find a third person for it. So it's sitting in your desk, and, you're waiting for the phone to ring because the author's going to call you and say, hey, where's my paper? So what you would do is you would, call one of your board members, get them on the phone and say, hey, look, I got this paper, reviewer one says this, reviewer two says that. Could
Hmm.
you just take a look at this one bit here and tell me
Hmm.
what do you think of it? I don't
Right.
care about the rest of it. The rest of it's okay, but this one bit here, this is the part they don't agree on. Take a
Hmm.
look at it and let me know by tomorrow,
Right.
please. I think that kind of directed peer review has a real opportunity with generative AI, where instead of giving a reviewer a paper and a blinking cursor in a review submission form,
Hmm.
be able to have a conversation with them. Not telling them what to do, but here's the paper, here's what it's about. I took a first look at this, me, the generative AI. I took a first look at this,
Hmm.
and figure two doesn't seem to match up with what they're saying in the conclusion. So what do you think about that? Let the person respond. Follow-up question, let the person respond. Eventually, what comes out of that dialogue between the
Hmm.
generative AI and the reviewer is a referee report,
Hmm.
but it's been directed and enhanced, and you're not putting all of the burden onto the review at the very beginning of, here's a blinking cursor. Tell me about this paper. Go spend the next 8 hours looking at it. Because these reviews take a long time to do well, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So interesting. So the directed peer review, is that a term that is going around? Because I haven't heard it. I would have thought that what you described in terms of critiquing, arriving at a consensus between two reviewer reports would be what you would call as a meta review. And meta review is a research that is ongoing in the field of, let's say, generative AI supporting reviews. So it is somewhere in between. I suppose I haven't come across it, but I also am aware of the future, the potential future of having dedicated AI agents that are considered experts. I think even Ethan Mollick might have talked about it. We
Mhm.
might be interacting as a reader. Let's assume that, let's put ourselves in the reader's shoes for a moment. The reader
Mhm.
would be interacting or reading a paper and would be questioning, as in using an AI maybe to understand something, and that AI would also have all the information related to what the reviewer said, and in this case, what the directed peer review,
Mhm.
all of that. So do you see that as a sort of vision, maybe 10 years, 20 years down the line?
No, not 10 years, 20 years. I personally think that in a couple of years,
Wow.
maybe, at least in the physical sciences, maybe half of our readers will be interacting with the literature, not via PDFs, but
Right,
via some sort of generative AI agent.
right.
The quote I like to use is, I don't read papers. I have a computer that reads papers, and then I can talk to it. It's
Yeah,
like having journal club. Like a professor doesn't read
yeah.
every single paper that's on the journal. The professor has a journal club to have, the students and the postdocs go out, read the papers, come back, discuss them, and
Mm.
be able to have that back and forth with them. So
Right,
imagine being able to have that sort of, you know, superhuman recall of what's in the literature
right,
and some basic ability to analyze, a particular
right.
piece of research and be able to learn from it that way. But I think that's, we're starting to see behavior like that now. So I don't think that's not a 20-year thing. I think that's
Wow.
especially in a hyper competitive research environment, that's a couple year thing.
Interesting that you brought up physical sciences. I was recently at the peer review congress in Chicago, and
Mhm.
there were, I guess, maybe three factions, but one very pro AI in peer review faction was obviously from the field of computer science and machine learning. From
Yep.
Carnegie Mellon, there were a bunch of research abstracts and papers presented. So there is, and so they are pro, and they are looking at already figuring out systems which can withstand the attack, adversarial attacks, and everything. So that's one. And then I would say the vast majority of the audience there would be, let's say, they're still skeptical about whether AI is is, let's say, good enough to be considered as a reviewer or in a similar role? And I'll ask you a question regarding that. And there was also some cutting edge, I would say, AI based research being conducted in medical journals. I was surprised because I'm from the field of orthopedic surgery. So, I'm surprised that medicine based journals are taking a sort of a lead in it. And AnyGem AI or AnyGem AI itself is a journal that accepts papers on the use of generative AI assisting medical practitioners. But it conducted an experiment where it put basically the peer review was done by two generative GPT-5 and I think Gemini 2.5, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And an editor was supposed to look at the results of these two peer reviews and to see if they're good enough. And apparently they found that it was very good. And so basically it was one of the first talks about what the experience was. So my question to you is this: do you think, as we are in the middle of September in 2025, do you think AI is, let's say, good enough right now to be a reviewer, and could it replace review? Because that's a concern, as nobody wants reviewers to be replaced. So what are your
Yeah,
thoughts on it?
yeah. I'm not sure if it's good enough in 2025, except for maybe fields where it's very determinative, like you
Mm-hmm.
can verify if the code executes or not, but that's not the majority of interesting papers. I'm not sure if it's good enough yet, and I do keep in mind that something that doesn't work today
Mm-hmm.
might work in 6 months or a year,
Right.
given the speed that things are going. However, I also think that we should be using tools like generative AI to assist people and to
Mm-hmm.
assist in the process. So, I can imagine a scenario where we had a completely, AI review process, AI edited journal, but that would have to be disclosed. That would have
Mm-hmm.
to be super obvious. Because I think at some point it also becomes kind of a community acceptance issue as well. Like at, at my company, we want people to be in the loop. We want
Mm-hmm.
to have that kind of human oversight and have the AI assisting people. But I can also see somebody might want to, go ahead and put everything in there and see how it goes. I think we just have to be transparent with our authors and with our readers how the research we're publishing, how it was vetted, how it was examined.
Right. So I think we can agree, you and I can agree that assistive is what I think even I'm comfortable with. And, in terms of how I envision things, it will be human assistive and human in the loop workflow. So is there, in the context of peer review, is there some things that you think that need to be under human, let's say, overview? Is there something like that? For example, I'm giving you a leading sort of a point, like the assessment of novelty of a manuscript or a research. Do you think that humans should still do it?
Again, I think it depends on the journal and what kind of service you're
Mm,
providing. So if it's a journal like we know it today,
mhm,
um, then there are certain aspects where having the computer work on it is better. So, checking the references, doing the copy editing, checking the reviews, checking the data. I'd love to have a working statistics editor that could do,
mm,
that sort of thing. Um, but on today's journals, I think you want to have a person in the loop who can make that
mm,
final,
right.
potentially career influencing
Mm,
decision of acceptance or rejection.
okay.
Now that said, you can imagine, like a preprint server, for example, that doesn't have any peer review today.
Mm,
You know, wouldn't it be great if you had some kind of, labeled as computer assisted peer review that was publishing what it came up with alongside of it to have some sort of
right.
control on a preprint or feedback in a preprint that might help the author.
Right.
Uh, so I don't think it's not a yes and no thing. It's a
Mm,
continuum. Although, where we are today with, what our customers and readers and authors and editors expect today,
mhm,
um, I think will definitely be person in the loop, human in the loop,
right.
for a bit longer.
Right. So we've covered some aspects of peer review, and I completely agree that the decision of whether to accept a paper or reject a paper, at least right now, we cannot obviously entrust an AI with it. So having said that, we started our conversation on the screening, the offloading of some of the things that editors and the peer reviewers need to do. In the context of screening, do you see generative AI contributing better than, let's say, machine learning or any other conventional forms of, let's say, artificial intelligence? Uh, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I think there's lots of, interesting things that you can be doing with generative AI on that screening part.
Hmm.
So for example, um, we ask authors to disclose what kinds of generative AI they've used,
Hmm.
in creating the paper. And, today that might look like a checklist, or it might look like I have to go write myself a disclosure statement. But, like with a lot of things, imagine if you could just, answer like a survey or a form with 10 different boxes on it and have the computer ask you a couple of follow-up questions and have it generate for
Hmm.
you a disclosure statement that you could accept or reject. So,
Hmm.
things like that where we're taking out some of the administrative busy work
Hmm.
that is, it's not busy work because we want to make sure that the papers
Exactly.
that we're
Yeah.
producing are reliable, but that's sort of things that you need to do, to, it's like when you file your taxes, you got to fill out the forms. We're doing the same thing. How do we make that easier for our authors so they can spend less time doing that and more time doing research?
Right. So, two things that you've already brought up in terms of this. This is an interesting thing, the generative aspect to help authors to generate a, let's say, disclosure statement, or even let's just talk about directed peer review as well. So, as a reader, I'm always going to question whether what I'm reading, what, let's say, the AI generated disclosure statement and that is a directed peer review is accurate or not, because that's in terms of trust and reliability. That's where everybody has still is skeptical. That's basically that's a summary of the peer review congress, as in people not trusting AI. So where do you think the how do you think that can be improved in the context of, let's say, academic use cases for generative AI?
Yeah, I think the big opportunity there is for how do we teach the generative AI what we know, and how do we do that continuously? So how do we take papers as they're being published and put them to a form that's readable and accessible by generative AI? Um, I think about it like, do you want your mother to go on to ChatGPT and ask it about vaccines and get an answer that's made up of stuff from
Hmm.
X Reddit, or stuff that's made up of things from, journals where
Right.
somebody has looked at it. So how do I think we can increase the reliability and reduce hallucinations
Mm.
by giving the generative AI access to that high quality data at the time of inference. And
Right.
I think that's a big push.
I think Wiley is leading in terms of content licensing with AI as well, as far as my research goes. So that's
Right.
that's excellent. I also agree with that. In terms of AI content detection is always is sort of, it's like an arms race, if I look at it, because AI is generating content and there are a better AI tools to detect the generated content. What are your thoughts on this? Because that's another thing that is was a talking point in the peer review congress and in the context of peer review as well, because peer reviewers may be using AI. I mean, I'm just modifying my statement to be politically
Yeah.
correct. You know what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that arms race in terms of using and the detection
Yeah.
of AI?
Yeah. So at Wiley, we're embracing the
Mm.
use of AI, and I suspect other publishers are as well, because it's a tool. And it's a tool that helps people to be more productive, to get more done, to take out some of the busy work. And so if we say we can use it, but you can't use it, that's kind of hypocritical, right? We
Right. Right.
we want people to use it, but we want people to use it in the right places and help people to use it safely and ethically.
Mhm.
So that's why we're about, transparency and disclosure. Is Can you use AI to help clean up your English? I think that's great.
Mhm.
I live in Germany and I'm obviously not a German native speaker. And it's much easier for me to think and write in my own language and convert it later than trying to do that,
Right.
off the top of my head. And so I think, in that case like that, generative AI has the potential to be a big leveler and really, increase the diversity of what we're publishing.
Hmm.
Um, should I be using generative AI to generate my data?
Hmm.
No, probably
Right.
not. So it's a tool like any other kind of tool.
Right.
It's how you use the tool. What are your intents of the tool? Practically, can you detect generative AI? You can in some cases. I'm still in two minds about that. A preprint came out like a month ago saying that it's more possible than
Yes.
we.
Yes.
Um, but I also would not be surprised if that ability goes away within a year
Hmm.
either.
Right.
Um, and so when we're thinking about research integrity, generative AI detection isn't a yes, no reason to reject a paper
Mm.
sort of thing. It's
Mm.
one signal among many that we look at.
Right.
And there are lots of other things that you would look for in a paper that would be a research integrity issue besides generative AI. It's one of many signals.
Excellent. Pivoting the integrity aspect in terms of disclosure to the peer review side of things, do you think that peer reviewers, if they use the AI, should ought to declare and disclose the use of AI?
Yeah, yeah, they should definitely disclose, and they should also be a little careful. And
Hmm.
the reason is when I, as an editor, send you as a reviewer a paper, there's confidentiality
Hmm.
between you and me and the author. And so if I am a reviewer and I upload my paper to, say, the free version of an online
Hmm.
large language model, and there's a chance that that'll be used in a
Mm.
training run, and it might be,
Right.
you don't want to scoop the author by having it show up in like, in a release a couple months down the road.
Mm.
So I think reviewers should be using it carefully. They, should be working with their local, IT departments and teams to figure out, is there a chance that this is going to be is going to be used in training run or not? And yeah, disclosing to the editor, yes, I read this paper. I take responsibility for this review, and I used ChatGPT to help clarify my points. I think that's fine. It does depend on each individual journal.
Mm.
So like different journals will have their own policies. Um, but why not use the tools that we have at our disposal to improve the quality of the feedback that we're giving it authors?
All right. So, what do you think of? I'm grouping a bunch of different things in terms of cognitive offloading.
Mhm.
Would you think that that would be a problem because humans tend to, if they're not working their skills, they may not be as sharp, and also the
Yep.
bias and the equity. The language models themselves have been trained on text that is
Yeah.
obviously has a lot of bias, and that would again reflect in their own the review. If they're assisting. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I think for the first part about cognitive offloading,
Hmm.
I think we see that in waves. So for example, when we first started using ChatGPT at my work, all of a sudden I started getting emails from people with multiple bullet points in bold and M dashes and things like that. For the
Yeah.
record, I was using M dashes before they were cool.
Me too.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and it became super obvious that they were getting help and they weren't talking about it, that secret cyborg idea. However, as time goes on and people learn how to use these tools and work with them instead of just taking whatever they make and copying it into an email and sending it, or copying it into a free report and sending it, um, using them as a thinking partner rather than something that you just offload your
Mm,
work onto,
mm,
I think is important. So, you know, I use, tools like this to bounce ideas off back and forth. If I was reviewing papers, I would be asking it for ideas,
mhm.
thinking about, what's working, what's not working, um, but not using it as a shortcut to just,
Right.
write my review or write my high school essay. Um, in terms of bias, yeah, uh, this is super important because these models, for the most part, are trained on the internet. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the internet can be a horrible place. And so it's
I
important.
wouldn't have noticed at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's important. It's important for our authors and editors to be transparent about the tools they're using, but we also need the large language model labs to be more transparent about what data they're using to train it on, because they're not super transparent about their sources. And I would want to know, am I using something that has been trained on sources that I
Mm,
trust or sources that in my web browser I would be avoiding, that sort of
right.
thing. So yeah, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with, baked in assumptions about what people know and how to act and things like that that are going to be in these things? Sure.
Right. So, Dave, you've already summarized a lot of different things in terms of practical advice, but I just would like to, sort of like to conclude the conversation about the use of generative AI. Do you have some practical advice for, let's say, authors as well as peer reviewers in the context of use of generative AI? You've said it all already,
Sure.
but maybe you can summarize it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my big piece of advice is if you've been hesitant to try it. Or if you tried it a year ago and you said, well, this isn't for me, it's not very good, come back to it because the rate of change in this field is so fast.
Yeah.
Things that it did not work a year ago work now. Um, in whatever tool you're using, look for the switch or the button or whatever to use the most recent
Mm-hmm.
model because a lot of times it'll direct you to the free one or the cheap one by default.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really get to see the power of these frontier models like GPT-5 or Claude Opus or things like that. So try to use the most powerful one that you can get your hands on. Um, and experiment with it because these models, it's like having a really smart but sometimes flaky intern. Like you don't know what it can and can't do until you try it. And so you need to work with it a bit to see, what it does well, what it doesn't do well, and not to get frustrated when it comes back with something that's complete nonsense. You just know that it's just a computer, it's just math. So now you know, okay, it doesn't do that well. Let's see if it can do something else instead. Um, but again, trying it because the power of these tools is really interesting and potentially transformative in how folks are doing their work.
I think that's a very well-rounded, balanced viewpoint that you have, and I think it'll be useful for all the listeners for joining in for the podcast. So, Dave, once again, thank you for taking some time out for and having this wonderful conversation with us. Is there something that you would like to, plug in terms of the work that you're doing or your social media, something where people can reach out to you in terms of questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can hit me at linkedin.com/ DW Flanagan,
Mhm.
and otherwise just, Wiley.com.
Excellent. Thank you. So, for all the listeners who have joined this Research and Beyond episode, if you're joining us on YouTube or LinkedIn, please subscribe to our channels so that you get alerted when the next such podcast is being broadcast. And we'd also love your feedback, and you can share your thoughts or any feedback on any of these platforms or write to us on LinkedIn. We also have emails if you want to. And if you, we would also like you to subscribe to Research and Beyond by Inago on Spotify, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and so that we can catch all the episodes whenever you want. So once again, Dave, thanks for joining, and this was a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot, and I think it's a very balanced perspectives, and we'll hope to have you soon in a future episode of Research and Beyond. So until then,
Thanks a lot.
yeah, until then, this is Dr. Kike signing off for Research and Beyond. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye, Dave.